Hello everyone, welcome back to NotARealRoadTest. This is spring season in Forza Horizon 4, and today I'm going to show you the 2001 Acura Integra Type R, a front-wheel drive performance hero from the golden era of Japanese cars. This is one of the many cars that I haven't driven at all, so in this review the plan is to drive this car stock, see how we can push its characteristics to its full potential, and then see how it drives at full potential. I've picked this car this week because I realised that all the cars I've picked so far for not really road testing have been European, so I thought I'd pick an interesting Japanese car. Yes, Acura is technically an American brand, but it's basically Japanese, given that it's Honda's luxury arm. Any petrolhead who was alive in the late 1990s will be able to remember the Integra Type R. It may not stand on the same pedestal as the NSX, the Supra or the Skyline, but those cars were aiming at the exotics from Porsche and Ferrari. The Integra is still revered by many for its relative accessibility and no-frills attitude to handling. It was also one of the Hondas produced in the era when they'd gotten very good at developing their popular VTEC engines, because what kind of legendary Honda doesn't feature VTEC? That sums up why I've jumped into the Integra Type R today, so let's go take it for a spin. This Integra was the third generation of its kind, opting for a more sporting coupe body style in an effort to shake the age-old domestic and docile Honda image. It sold from 1994 to 2001. The Type R was the flagship model of this generation Integra, the all-singing, all-dancing edition that sold in very limited numbers. There was a GSR model that was fairly sporty but didn't quite go the whole hog. It was therefore in the Type R's best interest to pick up where the GSR left off. The Type R first came to North America in 1997 and started at $24,000 US, which is around $38,500 in today's money and equivalent to over £41,000 based on the original price of the Honda badged UK version. Times have changed since this car went out of production, and last year one of these sold at an auction for $82,000 US, which is nearly £64,000. No surprises, as the Type R version sold in fairly limited quantities at around 500 per year. In terms of Forza performance class, the Integra Type R sits on the higher end of the C class, with a performance indicator of 596 in stock form. And although the sports coupe body shape is glaringly obvious, it falls under the retro hot hatch category here in Horizon 4. Its rivals here are therefore the Mark III VW Golf VR6, the VW Corrado VR6, and the Integra's successor, the Acura RSX. In the real world, the Integra was up against other small, relatively affordable sports coupes like the Toyota Celica, the Fiat Coupe, the Mitsubishi FTO V6, and the Toyota MR2. The Type R is also classed as a reasonably priced car owing to its modest $25,000 credit price at the Horizon Auto Show, but you will be able to buy one for peanuts if you go to the auctions. Hardly representative of the car's legendary status or real-life prices. You might be wondering what exactly justifies the high real-life prices of this car, and that question can be answered by just understanding some of the technology that's under the skin. Let's start with the gearbox. It's taken from the GSR and given closer gear ratios, a lightened flywheel to allow easier revving, and a special helical limited slip differential to maintain composure in the corners. In the handling department, the original car has gone on a diet and bodybuilding routine to achieve both higher chassis rigidity and weight reduction, even removing some of the soundproofing. Of course, it also gets stiffer springs, stiffer dampers, thicker sway bars, and bigger brake discs as well. And that rear wing isn't for gathering more looks either. It actually reduces lift at the rear of the car to maintain high-speed stability. Then there's the VTEC unit, the beating heart of this car. This was also taken from the GSR, but it's then jam-packed with race-bred technology, such as reshaped intake valves, molybdenum-coated aluminium pistons, high-strength and lightweight conrods, high-lift camshafts, a higher compression ratio, a larger throttle body, and a high-volume exhaust manifold. The engine ports are even hand-polished to hasten and smoothen the airflow to and from the engine. That's truly meticulous work. For the VTEC noobs out there, the reason this technology is so iconic is because it provides a valve timing system that's optimised for both low and high RPM operations. For fear of alienating people, I won't go into the full technical process and will instead leave a link to an engineering explain video that talks it through very well. But in layman terms, at low revs the engine is serene and offers stability and fuel efficiency, but at higher revs it transforms to deliver an astonishing level of power. Now what does this all mean? It means that despite the best efforts of Honda's activities in supplying F1 engines and creating the indelible NSX, Honda felt there was still more to be done in proving to the world that it could make fastidious cars that could also be dynamically engaging, mechanically innovative, and technically marvellous. The Integra's 4-cylinder B18C VTEC engine pumps out 195 brake horsepower at 7,800 RPM and 130 pound-feet of torque at 7,500 RPM. That's truly impressive for a 1.8 litre naturally aspirated engine, even today, let alone back then. In fact, this particular VTEC unit famously had a higher specific power output than a Ferrari F355 costing 4 times as much. The VTEC itself kicks in at 5,700 RPM. You get from 0 to 60 in 6.2 seconds, and if you keep shifting the close ratio 5-speed manual, it'll keep on going to 153 miles an hour. I'm not surprised with that acceleration figure, as this Acura weighs in at just under 1,200 kilos. That all explains why you'll have seen true petrolheads buying these back when they were made. And it's easy to see why. As well as the petrolheads though, you'll have seen petrolhead thieves zipping about in them. Hondas from this era were just a little bit too easy to steal. With all of that in mind, let's go and see how the Integra Type R drives in stock form. It's a proper screamer! Well, you can definitely tell it has VTEC. Can we tell where the VTEC threshold is? Yeah, it kicks in at about, I think, 5,200 in this car. Or at least there's an audible difference. It sounds kind of similar to modified Hondas with VTEC. Maybe not the most accurate representation, but it's accurate enough. You do get a very good sensation of power progression as well. It's really sort of above 6,000 RPM where the car feels more alive. Because, for example, if let's go into 5th gear and do a slower speed, it's like a typical Honda, I guess. Or like what people perceived Honda to be before they started making performance cars. But it's above 6,000 RPM where people like me are interested in. And I think it is a really responsive engine as well. Usually I drive pretty quick cars in Horizon 4. This has sort of less than 200 horsepower. I was expecting it to be quite slow. It might be the VTEC effect, but I don't think this car is slow. Which is great. It could just be the VTEC noise, but if it is actually slow, I'm not as bothered really. Had a bit of a slide there. For a front-wheel drive car, this is very neutral feeling. And I say that with the best possible praise because I just oversteered a bit. That's so cool. How have they done this? Ah! How have they made a front-wheel drive car behave in such a balanced manner? To be fair, we are on a less grippy surface because of the rain. See, the front tyres don't feel very busy. Clearly they've got this helical LSD system to work really well. Oh wow, just look at that. I think by today's standards, certainly the Integra Type R is fairly conservatively styled, but I think back in the day you could tell it was the performance model. It looks quite tasteful. I do believe that at some point the Integras had headlights that were sort of in one unit rather than the 2 round headlamps on each side, and I think it looks way better this way. We've got a nice grille as well. The spoiler is tasteful too. It's distinctly Honda, but not in a boring sense. In case you'd forgotten you were driving a Type R, you can tell by looking just in front of the back wheels. Got Type R logos on both sides. This takes the low-speed corners beautifully. There must be some improved weight distribution compared to the other Integra models, because it just feels really balanced. And I think the benefit of not giving it a crazy amount of power, sort of 195 horsepower, is they don't have to fit really wide tyres, so it means at the limit you can sort of slide it about. You can lose a bit of grip. I've noticed it's not really grip at the rear, it's more grip at the front, so you can oversteer, which I think is a phenomenal result in a car that is front-wheel drive. No other way of putting it. It's only when you go on a hill that you realise it's not that powerful. I'm sure we can fix that later. These brakes are pretty good. I think it must be just the lack of weight that makes this car such a peach to drive, at least around corners. That's interesting, because when I was proving the... That wasn't the best demonstration of this car's capabilities. It'll probably be the spring damper sway bar setups as well, but when you push, you don't seem to get any understeer, which is brilliant, but when you go over the limit, your back end wants to kick out. I just find this really intriguing for a front-wheel drive car. Taking these corners awfully well. That was a crappy gear shift. I was in the non-VTEC region. How could I do that? I can imagine this might get a bit tiresome if you're just cruising on the motorway and you're sitting, I don't know, 4,000 revs. But I can't feel that because I'm not in that scenario. My drive car doesn't have any emotions. But so far, the handling of the Type R is just infallible. Depending how well you take a corner when you first get in, yeah, really, really neutral. You just keep on pushing, you keep on accelerating, and then it's only when you... Wow. It does like to kick its tail out mid and sort of corner exit, but it's so easy to correct. Probably because we don't have an awful lot of torque, and the power is going to the front after all, so it's just easier to manage. If you do reach the limit, yes, you will oversteer, but again, it's very easy to correct. I'm starting to see why this car was seen as just a legend, especially when it came to its handling. I'm pretty sure I read, it could have been a Jalopnik article or an Evo article that said this car is the best handling front-wheel drive car ever made. I trust that. In fact, I'm demonstrating that. Ah! I just ruined that analogy. Oh, that was a sick drift. Oh, that was a nice slide. You could actually get loads of drift points in the Integra. Who needs a rear drive car? In terms of hitting all the petrol head criteria, this does really well. And it's very easy to see why this is a reasonably priced car in the game. You get a lot of car for your money. But there are some improvements we can make. So let's go and tune the Integra Type R. Well, we're in the tuning shop now, and there isn't a lot we can do with the Integra Type R. It's pretty perfect. I can't get over how harmonious the handling is. And I think it's all to do with the lightness of this car, the weight distribution as well. There's no understeer, and understeer is really annoying. Oversteer can be fun, and this car oversteers when it's losing grip. Other things I like are the engine is a proper screamer when you're in that VTEC zone, and the gears are very slick and shift very quickly at the press of my bumper buttons. And there are downsides, of course. They're tainting the car a bit, but compared to some of the other cars I've not really road tested in this series, they're almost minor. We can address those. And those things are the flywheel. I don't know if I can change the flywheel. If I get a heavier flywheel, it will sacrifice the free revving nature of this car somewhat, and just for a bit of, getting up the hill a lot more easier. But the other way to get up hills more quickly and less leisurely would be if we gave the engine more torque. By giving the engine more torque, we would inevitably need to put more power in. I don't want to force-induce this engine because I have a bit of a penchant for naturally aspirated engines, and this is from the era when VTEC engines from Honda were all naturally aspirated, and there is a certain pleasure you get from those. It's unique to the VTEC engines. That linear power and that fast progression of that power cannot be sacrificed in this car at all. So if you want to keep to this VTEC philosophy, we cannot turbocharge it. There are turbocharged VTECs now, but that is all in the name of emission control. In theory, we could supercharge the Integra Type R. You'd still continue to have a linear power delivery, but I want to keep this VTEC unit pure because they've done such a smashing job already. And I don't want to add too much weight on the car, and sadly adding force induction would add some weight. Saying that, I'm not going to take away any more weight either because, well, it doesn't need it. It's already lacking some of the sound insulation. Don't want my emotionless drive car's ears to bleed. We must keep this car's handling balance as perfect as it is. If we can improve it, then that would be fantastic. So after all, the Integra was all about being a hoot in the corners, but you've also got a nice engine note to listen to and to power you through those corners without having such a large engine that would possibly disrupt the weight distribution of the car. So we're going to dial up all of this car's positive points to 11, but we're also going to let the power catch up to those levels. So I think we can increase the grip threshold even more by fitting race tyres. For added precautions, I also bought a fully customizable diff just in case we do get a bit more torque steer now that we've increased the torque. Also, at just the very last minute, I decided to get a race transmission with fully customizable ratio and final drive tuning. The reason being, this car will be hitting the end of 5th gear quite a lot, so it's a good idea to give it a 6th gear. We can tune the top speed so that it reaches its natural top speed based on the additional power we've given it. I tend to use the ZF transmission that was released in the early 2000s, debuted in, BMWs, Jaguars. I'm going to use their ratios, which I will input here, and you can use them if you want. I'm going to use the same gear spacing as the ZF box, but I'm going to alter the final drive based on what I think will be a realistic top speed for the tuned Integra Type R. Just in case we do get torque surges, and we will because we've increased the torque quite a lot, I'll reduce the acceleration setting on the front differential, which will allow it to lock more slowly, thus reducing understeer further while accelerating. I've had to bring the brake balance forward because it reduces the braking distance ever so slightly. It might mean we have less of a tendency to oversteer, and I think we will, because I've also increased the tyre widths. I vowed to keep the car's handling characteristics the same, but to sort of increase the level of grip and power available. I finally selected my tune, and it's been difficult just to keep the integrity, if you'll pardon the pun, off the handling. So let's go see how this modified Integra drives. I think the engine is far more responsive, and that's not to knock the original engine because that was a very responsive unit as well. It's just we've changed the intake valves and such. I think it's better with the 6-speed transmission as well. It feels a lot more sporty. Woohoo! That guy was mental. Went a bit mad there. Oh, we've got a bit of oversteer still at the limit. Woo! I just missed that car. I think the reactions are even better now. I mean, the obvious downside of my investment in this car is you wouldn't call it reasonably priced anymore. I did spend about 50,000 credits, or double the value of the price when new. But you know what? This car deserves it. It's so much to give on such a small budget, it's like you've got to empower it. I can point at a car, head towards it, and then immediately, just at the last second, turn the wheel away and, the lightness is still there. The agility is still there. In fact, the agility's been hastened a bit. It's like driving a mosquito that's about to OD on caffeine, but without the twitchiness. Oh, listen to that! VTEC in the tunnel, yo! You will oversteer a bit, now that the surface is moist. Legit, you can take this car to drift competitions. This isn't an American muscle car, why am I fishtailing? I was really worried while tuning this because I didn't want to ruin the balance. But I think it's driving just as it did before, maybe understeering ever so slightly more. Because I did bring the brake bias towards the front brakes rather than the rear, because all the weight's at the front. Not that I could tell. This is certainly more on the safe side. It's got higher grip limits, so it's harder to get it to kick out unless you're in the rain, or you kind of muck up a corner, or you induce drift with the handbrake. And the benefit of the suspension tune is the springs are stiffer, so the dampers, the ride height is lower, so this car is rolling a lot less than it did. So we've got even better cornering abilities. We can come into the corner a lot quicker and it will still remain composed. And the benefit of wider tyres and the race compound, of course, is can do ridiculous speeds through these bends while still drifting because of this car's beautiful balance. I keep forgetting that this is an Acura, but only the Americans will get annoyed. See, the uphill progression is now good, as opposed to non-existent. I'll be honest, occasionally I might drive this car untuned because it's a different form of entertainment. Most of the time when I modify cars, they're always more enjoyable after tuning, but this time I'm kind of missing the oversteering, because you do oversteer still, but only when it's raining and you induce drift. Whereas before, you could go into a corner and you would just oversteer. I kind of miss that, so occasionally I probably will drive this car stock because it's phenomenal stock as well. We've just got more potential now. When you do get into a drift cycle that's sort of harder to get out of, it is a bit more twitchy, but it's more responsive as well, so I can live with that. And it's still very, very settled in the corners. And ultimately, this car is regarded as a performance hero in the front-wheel drive space. It feels more front-wheel drive than it did before because I've thrown more power towards the front wheels, but it's still fairly neutral. I don't think we've deviated from the philosophy though. The Integra Type R now is still a hoot in the corners. The engine is still phenomenal with great power delivery and what feels like instantaneous response. And really make progress now. We'll get to the top speed soon, but probably be able to get to sort of 170, maybe 175. From a 1.8 litre Honda, it's just amazing. This is actually one of the more memorable drives I've had. Brilliant car because, yes, it's a bit of a try-hard with all the tech that's behind it to make it go around corners in a really balanced manner. And is really agile, but woo! You can still have fun. It's not a boring, competent car. It's a fun, competent car, and that is what petrolheads live for. This is probably on the stronger side of the retro hot hatch category in Forza, just because of its handling merits. I do think you could get a Clio Williams to behave in a similar way. You could probably get a Peugeot 205 to do the same. Given the size of this compared to the Clio and the 205, this shouldn't be able to handle this well, but it does, and that's phenomenal. But I'm just more impressed by this than some of the other cars you've driven. You've noticed that tuning the cars makes me really happy, especially driving them after they've been tuned up to 11. But this is just fantastic. It was fantastic to begin with, and it's even better now Wow, I'm losing grip on the tyres because I've been driving for so long. It's just more fantastic. What a car. No wonder people want to steal these. I can completely see the hype of this car. I can even see why someone paid $82,000 for one at auction. My favourite car is the BMW 1M, and it has been my favourite ever since it came out because they're just the right size, it's got just the right level of power, it's a very good car in terms of handling, I think it looks good. This Acura Integra, I like it for all the same reasons as I like the 1M, and that is pretty high praise coming from me. Now I bet you're wondering, is this car as legendary as the petrolhead enthusiast's lore depicts it to be? So let me tell you, when I first tested the Integra Type R, I was met with a car that felt very light for its size, with very sharp and responsive yet harmonious handling. not to mention a good amount of grip with controlled looseness and an almost rear-wheel drive-like feel that was very settled and happened to have a quick gear shift. That was what was on my mind right up until I was met with hill ascents, which, if you'll pardon the pun, was a bit of an uphill battle. It was then when the lack of torque became apparent, and it just needed to be complemented with the right upgrades. I did all the usual stuff like tyres, brakes, suspension and the like at the tuning shop, but what was really needed was, you guessed it, more power, and as a consequence more torque for those hills. After tuning, and I emphasise that not a lot really needed doing if we were on a budget, but we're not in that position, I embraced a sizable increase in power, with enough torque for those uphill ascents, and a new 6-speed transmission to stay in that glorious VTEC power band. I did lose a bit of the rear-wheel drive feel for a more neutral overall handling setup, with a more focused and grippy nature, but still highly competent. The relative power combined with the relative lightness and eagerness to change direction gave the Type R an amateur race car feel, feeling more like a sports coupe than a hot hatch. In fact, the Type R technically has a head start over its rivals. While it's classified as a hot hatch in Forza Horizon 4, it's effectively a front-wheel drive sports car. It did confuse me as to why it's in the retro hot hatchback class rather than the retro sports car class. But when you consider that the latter category features blue-chip sports cars like the BMW Z3M Coupe, the TVR Cigaris and Mitsubishi GTO, as well as more accessible cars like both of the Toyota MR2s and the Lotus Elise, the Acura doesn't fit into either crew really. It's certainly a bit more nimble than some of the heavyweight retro sports cars, and right on the money with some of the others, but for reasons of power levels and powertrain, I'm going to focus on comparing it with the retro hot hatches instead. The Integra Type R is one of the most powerful cars on offer in this category while stock, which you'd hope given it's also one of the newest. Still, that should already increase the appeal towards this offering, since nearly all of these hot hatches basically cost the same, between 20 and 30,000 credits. You can enjoy the Type R on open country roads as well, and don't have to stick within the city centre limits to have fun, like I've done in the 1980s Ford Fiesta XR2 or Peugeot 205 Raleigh. I can't say it has the low-speed dexterity of those cars, but you can still make a lot of progress in any corner you present the Type R with. I also much prefer the handling of the Integra Type R to the admittedly less sporty Prelude SI and the Mark III VW Golf VR6, the latter of which at times really annoyed me with its understeer and made me forget about the sweet harmony of the VR6 engine. The Integra, on the other hand, can be power slided very easily in stock form. The VTEC unit is just so satisfying as well, and you can really enjoy its sensations when you pair it with such a competent overall package. The engine feels even more responsive than the chassis. Once I gave the car a 6-speed gearbox, I could really stay in that VTEC zone, making this car feel just completely unstoppable and leaving me wanting more. Lightness is key in this category, and that is the advantage that this car has over some of its more modern rivals in the category. This is a truly epic, yet truly accessible car with immense potential. We really tuned into this car's philosophy. It's supposed to be a complete blast in the corners and blow your socks off there, and that's what it did. And because it's a Honda, you can't forget that it's absolutely vital that the engine stays in the VTEC zone, and in Forza, what happens below 5,700 RPM is completely irrelevant. The VTEC is supposed to deliver endless pleasure, which it did. And it did all of this while being very driver-friendly as a front-wheel drive hot hatch. It's still a sports car though, so it's meant to feel light and trade off some practicality and creature comforts for more excitement, and it certainly delivers excitement, chiefly down to the superb VTEC unit and the very well sorted chassis. After tuning, the 6-speed gearbox meant I could enjoy more of the VTEC, and the power increase meant the highly capable chassis could see some more adventure. I'm still gobsmacked at the incredible value for money with this car. With all of the tuning added in, this is one of the best, if not the best car in terms of thrills, excitement and positive sensations per buck spent. Just how Honda intended and how many real-life reviews of the car attest. This was a truly memorable test drive for me too, with the value making this car quite the godsend. That's why I compared it to the BMW 1M. I've picked Like Eating Glass by Bloc Party from their 2005 debut album Silent Alarm, as the song that best describes the vibe I felt while hooning the Integra Type R this week. This song was one of many in the 2000s that marked the proliferation of indie rock as a genre, similar to how the Integra Type R was one of many performance cars that came from Japan in the 1990s. This song is best listened to when it's blasting out of your audio device to get the full experience, in the same way that to really seek pleasure from the VTEC, you've got to be on full throttle. And the chorus of the song, in my opinion, it's the best bit, and you just want to keep hearing more of it. Just like the Integra Type R's VTEC unit. On a personal level, Like Eating Glass is not just one of my favourite Bloc Party songs, but one of my favourite songs at the moment of all time. And I feel just the same way about the Acura Integra Type R. It's really a legend. The song is an absolute riot, as is the Integra Type R, and it was just the most appropriate vibe while powering through the corners. This was the 2001 Acura Integra Type R. It's very much a splendid choice for the road racing and street racing series, and the song that got me into the flow of driving it was Like Eating Glass by Bloc Party. Check out the links to the song in the description from Spotify, Apple Music and YouTube. I hope you've enjoyed this Not Real Road Test. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.